ATA for sending a legal letter the day before launch after my corporate family stole my work? I'm writing this from a throwaway because some of my old coworkers are the type to search their own names like it's cardio, and I'm not interested in giving anyone free closure. I'm going to try to lay this out plainly, but it's a lot, and the last few months have been the kind of exhausting where you don't feel tired until you sit down, and then you can't stand back up without your body filing a complaint with HR. For context, I work in corporate operations. Not the glamorous kind. The kind where you're hired because a process is broken and no one can explain how anything actually gets done without shrugging and saying, it's tribal knowledge. The kind where the same people who complain about chaos also treat structure like an insult. I joined my company about a year and a half ago as a process and enablement lead for a mid-sized team that handled client onboarding and internal handoffs. The company was in growth mode, which is corporate for we are sprinting with untied shoes and pretending it's a strategy. On my first day, my boss, Grant, sat me down and told me, with a straight face, we're a family here. I had heard that sentence before. Everyone has. It's like hearing this won't hurt in a dentist chair. It is never said for your benefit. But I needed the job. I moved for it. It was supposed to be a stable pivot out of agency work. I wanted normal hours and a paycheck that didn't require 3 different people to approve it like it was a moon landing. Grant was charismatic in a carefully rehearsed way. He smiled without showing his teeth, which made it feel like he was saving them for later. He talked about trust and ownership and high standards, and he loved saying the phrase lean into discomfort, as if discomfort was a yoga pose. The team itself was mostly good people who were drowning. The onboarding process was a mess. Sales promised timelines that operations couldn't meet. Ops scrambled, missed details, clients got frustrated, and then leadership would swoop in and blame execution. I'm not someone who thrives in chaos. I can handle pressure, but I like clarity. I like knowing what success looks like. I like systems that don't depend on one person remembering a thing on a Tuesday. So I did what I always do when something is broken and everyone has learned to live with it. I watched first. For the first few weeks, I didn't push. I sat in meetings. I took notes. I asked questions that were genuinely curious, not performative. I listened for what people complained about when they thought leadership wasn't listening. What I found was a patchwork of Google Docs, outdated slides, and one spreadsheet that lived on a shared drive called final_V7_use_this_1_seriously. People had made their own checklists because they didn't trust the official ones. There were templates, but no one knew which were current. Handoffs happened in Slack threads that disappeared into the scroll. Training was shadow Jenna if you can catch her between fires. I started mapping the process. Not just the ideal version. The real version. The version that included the 10-minute delays and the wait, who owns this, and the parts where people did work twice because they didn't trust the first pass. I made a living workflow map. I built a race-eye chart that actually reflected who was doing what instead of who leadership wanted to be doing it. I created a consolidated template library and version control. I wrote onboarding scripts that weren't just bullet points, but actual talk tracks people could use with clients. I built it like I was building a house someone had to live in. I thought about edge cases. I thought about the person who gets pulled into a meeting mid-task and returns with no memory of where they left off. I thought about the brand new hire who doesn't know which acronyms are safe to ask about. And I did it in a way that didn't embarrass anyone. That was important to me. I wasn't trying to prove the team had failed. I was trying to make sure they didn't have to keep failing to survive. The team noticed quickly. People started asking me for help. Do you have a template for this? Can you show me how you structured that handoff? Can we use your checklist? Grant noticed too. At first, he was supportive in that vague leadership way. He'd say things like, love the initiative, and this is the kind of ownership we need. He'd mention my work in meetings, but he'd do it like it was happening around him, not because of me. Like the improvements were weather. Then, about 3 months in, leadership announced a big initiative. A reimagined onboarding experience. There was going to be a launch. There would be a deck. There would be a cross-functional rollout. There would be lots of shiny words about client delight. Grant called me into a one-on-one and told me, this is your baby. I remember the exact tone. It wasn't generous. It was strategic. Like he was placing a bet. He said he wanted me to lead the build-out, define the process, create the materials, train the team, coordinate with product and sales, and get it ready for launch in 8 weeks. 8 weeks. I looked at him and said, carefully, that's aggressive. He smiled without his teeth again and said, we do hard things here. So I did it. I built the whole thing. I wrote the new SPs. I designed the templates. I built the training plan with session outlines and exercises. I created role-based playbooks. I built a client-facing timeline that didn't overpromise. I worked with sales to align language, which was like herding cats that had been trained to hiss at calendars. I collaborated with product to clarify what was possible and what was marketing fantasy. I documented everything. Not because I was paranoid, but because documentation is what I do. I'm the person who writes down the decision and the why, so 6 months later no one has to relitigate it in a meeting. I made a central folder. I made an index doc with links to everything. I created a version history. I named things in a way that wouldn't make future Anastasia want to scream. Yes, my name is Anastasia, and I built the entire onboarding process so the team could finally breathe without apologizing for systems they didn't control. It started to work almost immediately, even before launch. The team used the templates because they were actually useful. Handoffs improved. Client escalations dropped. Internal confusion shrank. People stopped demanding Jenna like she was a human help desk. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a while at work, pride. Then the tone shifted. It was subtle at first. Grant started attending meetings he hadn't cared about before. He started asking me to send him files that were already in the shared folder. He started saying things like, we should tighten messaging, which was code for, I want to control what gets presented. He began inserting himself into my work like a watermark. One afternoon, I was invited to a leadership check-in about the launch. I was excited. I had a progress update. I had data. I had testimonials from the team. I had a clear list of what still needed decisions. Grant joined the call 2 minutes late and launched into a presentation like he'd been doing the work. He shared a deck I had made, my formatting, my screenshots, my flow diagram, and he spoke over it like it was his thought process. He didn't say my name once. At first, I told myself it was a fluke. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he assumed everyone knew I built it. But then it happened again. And again. And the more the work got praised, the more Grant claimed space around it. He'd say we when he meant I. He'd say my team built when he meant I built and his team survived. He started referring to the process as Grant's onboarding framework in casual conversation. I heard it first from a sales manager who said, Grant's new onboarding thing actually looks solid. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. When I didn't respond quickly, the manager added, you know, the one he's rolling out. The new client path. I felt my face go hot. Not because I needed a trophy. Because something about it felt like theft in slow motion. I brought it up to Grant in our one-on-one. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I said, lightly, hey, I noticed in the leadership check-in you presented the onboarding deck. Next time, can you introduce me as the lead? It would help cross-functional partners know who to follow up with. Grant's smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Like a door closing. He said, Anastasia, you're doing great work, but you need to understand optics. I waited. He continued, leadership wants to see alignment. They don't want to see one person driving the whole thing. It needs to look like the org is functioning. I stared at him, trying to make sense of the words. So, I shouldn't be recognized because it might make the org look broken. He leaned back, hands behind his head, relaxed like he was teaching me something. It's not about you. It's about the story we're telling. That was the first time I felt the ground shift under my feet. After that conversation, my access started to change. Not officially. Just friction. Grant asked me to run things by him before sharing with stakeholders. He insisted on being copied on every email. He started scheduling meetings with my partners without inviting me. He would forward my messages to other leaders with comments like, we're working on this, like I was a junior assistant. Then HR got involved. Not because I did anything wrong. Because Grant decided I needed support. I got a calendar invite from HR titled Check-in, Team Dynamics. I remember reading it twice. Team Dynamics. Like we were middle schoolers fighting over a cafeteria table. The HR rep, Marlene, was pleasant in that practiced way. She asked how I was feeling, how I thought the team was functioning, whether I felt aligned with leadership expectations. I said, honestly, that I thought the team was improving and I was proud of the work, but I was confused by the shifting expectations around visibility and ownership. Marlene nodded slowly, like she was taking in something delicate. Then she said, Grant mentioned you've been struggling with collaboration. I felt my stomach drop. Collaboration? He's concerned that you've been operating independently, she said. That you're not bringing others along. I wanted to laugh. I had trained the whole team. I had created materials specifically to empower others. I had set up weekly working sessions so people could contribute. I said, carefully, can you give me an example? Marlene hesitated. He said you sometimes present ideas in a way that makes others feel behind. I stared at her. So, I'm making people feel behind by creating structure. She smiled softly. It's about tone. Culture fit. There it was. The phrase that means nothing and everything. Culture fit is the corporate ghost story people tell when they want you to disappear without explaining why. I left the meeting feeling like I had walked into a room and found out everyone had been rehearsing a play about me without inviting me to read the script. From then on, the gaslighting ramped up. Grant would give me vague feedback like, you need to be more strategic, when I asked for specifics. He'd say, your communication style is very direct, like directness was a character flaw instead of a skill. He began rewriting history. He'd say things like, remember, we decided you'd support this work stream, as if I hadn't led it from day one. He'd refer to decisions I made with stakeholders as if he'd made them. He'd tell people I was helping with the launch, not leading it. Then, about 3 weeks before launch, he invited me to a meeting with 2 directors and someone from legal. The meeting was titled IP and Process Standardization. I knew right away what it was. Grant started the meeting by praising the work the team has done and saying it was important to protect the company's intellectual property. He spoke like he was delivering a TED Talk about integrity, which would have been funny if it wasn't my life. The legal rep, a man named Howard, asked me to confirm that all materials created for the onboarding initiative were work for hire and belonged to the company. I said they were created during my employment, yes. Grant smiled like he'd won something. Then Howard slid in the real question, were any of these materials created prior to your employment? Or based on outside frameworks you owned? I understood what was happening. They were building a narrative. They wanted to make sure I couldn't claim any rights. They wanted to lock the door before they pushed me out. I said, evenly, some of the methodology reflects best practices I've used in previous roles. The specific templates, docs, and training materials were created here. Grant nodded, satisfied. And then, like he couldn't help himself, he added, yes, and to be clear, Anastasia has been executing on the process framework I designed. I turned and looked at him. It was one of those moments where you see the person you thought you knew, and you realize they were wearing a mask you mistook for skin. I said, calmly, Grant, that isn't accurate. The room went quiet. Grant's smile tightened. We don't need to get into semantics. I looked at Howard. It's not semantics. I designed the workflow map, the RACI, the templates, the training plan, and the rollout schedule. I can show version histories and drafts. Grant's voice took on that gentle warning tone. Anastasia, this isn't the time. Howard cleared his throat and said, let's keep this constructive. Marlene from HR wasn't in that meeting, but I could feel her hovering like a scented candle of corporate consequences. I didn't argue further. I didn't need to. I had learned something important. Facts didn't matter in a room where the story had already been written. After that meeting, I started documenting in a different way. Not just for clarity, for protection. I saved copies of my work with metadata. I exported version histories. I took screenshots of file ownership. I forwarded key emails to my personal email, the ones that showed I was leading the work and being praised for it. I started keeping a timeline in a private document, dated entries of what happened and when. I didn't do it because I wanted revenge. I did it because I could feel the trap closing. About 2 weeks before launch, Grant told me the company was restructuring. He said it casually, like he was telling me the weather. He said, "We're shifting responsibilities. You'll be moving into a supporting role. Jenna will be the new onboarding lead." I stared at him. Jenna is already overloaded. She's a strong performer, he said. And she embodies our culture. There it was again. Culture. I said, "So what is my role?" He spread his hands. "We'll find where you fit. But I want you to be open. Less attached to ownership. Less attached to ownership." After building the thing, I went home that night and sat in my car in the driveway longer than I needed to. I watched my neighbor's lights flick on and off. I listened to the hum of my engine cooling. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I realized they weren't just moving me. They were erasing me. The next day, I showed up and did my work anyway. I trained Jenna. I walked her through the materials. I answered her questions. I didn't punish her for being handed a poison gift. Jenna looked uncomfortable the whole time. She kept saying things like, "I'm sure you'll still be involved, and Grant said you wanted this." I told her, gently, I didn't ask for it, but I'm here to make sure the team doesn't suffer. She looked at me like she wanted to apologize, but couldn't find a safe way. Meanwhile, Grant started holding launch prep meetings without me. The invites went to Jenna and leadership and key stakeholders. I would hear about decisions after they were made. Then something happened that shifted me from uneasy to certain. A coworker in IT, someone I'd become friendly with because I treated him like a human being and not a vending machine, messaged me privately. He said, "Hey, not sure if you already know this, but there's a permissions change request in the queue for the onboarding folder." My stomach clenched. "What kind of change?" He replied, "Ownership and access. It looks like they're transferring primary ownership from you to Grant and removing your edit access." I stared at my screen, feeling the blood rush in my ears. I typed back, "Can you screenshot the request?" He hesitated, then said, "I shouldn't. But I think you should know. Just be careful." He didn't send a screenshot, but he told me the ticket number. That was enough. I went into the folder immediately and checked permissions. Nothing had changed yet. The request must have been pending. I clicked through my files like someone checking a house for open windows after hearing a noise. That afternoon, Grant called me into his office. He sat down and folded his hands like he was about to deliver a compliment. "Anastasia, I want to talk about your future here." I stayed standing for a moment, then sat, because the power dynamics were already messy enough. He said, "You've done good work. But there have been concerns." I kept my voice neutral. "Concerns about what?" "About your approach," he said. "About collaboration. About alignment. About culture." He stacked the words like bricks, building a wall I was supposed to accept as reality. He continued, "We're going to be making some changes. And I think it might be best if we part ways." Just like that. No performance plan. No warning. No, let's work on it. Just part ways, like we were breaking up after a bad date, not ending a career move. I said, "Are you firing me?" He sighed, like I was making him do something unpleasant. "We're offering you a separation package." My mind felt strangely calm, like my body had decided panic would be a waste of energy. I said, "When would this happen?" He smiled again, no teeth. "We can talk details, but ideally soon. The launch is next week, and we need stability." Stability. He meant silence. He meant me gone. I asked, "So you want me to help with the launch, then leave?" He said, "We want a smooth transition. And I think that's in everyone's best interest." I nodded slowly. "Can I have that in writing?" His eyes narrowed. "HR will follow up." I left his office and went straight to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and put my hand over my mouth like I could hold all the anger inside before it leaked out. I didn't cry. I almost wanted to, because crying would have been simpler. But what I felt was sharper than sadness. It was the feeling of realizing someone has been smiling at you while sharpening a knife. That night, I went through my documentation again. I read emails and meeting notes like I was studying for an exam. I checked file histories. I found the Slack messages where Grant praised my work. I found the message where he called the onboarding framework your masterpiece. And then I found something worse. In my inbox, buried in a thread I hadn't opened because it was labeled as a scheduling update, was a forwarded chain. One of my stakeholders had accidentally included me in a reply all. The chain included Grant, HR, and 2 directors. It was dated 6 weeks earlier. Grant wrote, "We need to shift Anastasia out after the process is locked. She's not a culture fit long-term, but her deliverables are strong. Let's ensure we have IP clarity and a transition plan before launch." HR replied, "Agree. We should start coaching documentation around collaboration and tone to support the narrative." One of the directors replied, "Make sure materials are owned by the org before separation. Also minimize disruption optics." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change, but my understanding did. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't about me failing. This was a plan. They were going to use me like a contractor, harvest the work, then label me the problem for existing too visibly. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and felt something settle into place inside me. Not rage. Not panic. A decision. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to rant. I wasn't going to make a scene that would let them call me emotional. I was going to be calm. I reached out to an employment attorney the next day. I didn't tell anyone at work. I didn't threaten. I didn't even hint. I just gathered my materials, wrote down the timeline, and asked for a consultation. The attorney, a woman named Priya, listened to my story without interrupting. She asked for the email chain. She asked for my employment agreement. She asked about the separation offer. When I forwarded the email chain, I could almost hear her eyebrows lift through the phone. She said, "They put this in writing?" I said, "Yes." She let out a slow breath. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." We talked about leverage. Not in a dramatic way. In a practical way. Priya explained what I could and couldn't claim. She explained that work created as an employee generally belonged to the company, but retaliation, wrongful termination narratives, and misclassification of my role could create risk for them. And, importantly, the paper trail showed intent to manufacture a culture-fit justification while openly acknowledging my performance. She said, "They're not afraid of you being right. They're afraid of you being expensive." I asked her what my options were. She said, "You can negotiate a stronger severance, neutral references, non-disparagement, and a written acknowledgement of your contributions if that matters to you." I paused. "It does," she said, "then we ask for it." Over the next week, things at work got even stranger. Grant acted like we were still normal. He'd ask for status updates. He'd smile in meetings. Jenna looked like she was trying to disappear. HR sent me an email requesting I attend a performance alignment discussion. I didn't respond right away. I wanted Priya to see everything. Meanwhile, the launch date was approaching. The company was hyping it internally. There were Slack announcements. There were calendar holds. There was a launch day agenda created by Grant with his name plastered across it like a sponsor logo. And my access to the onboarding folder changed. One morning, I clicked into the library and saw I had view-only access. View-only. To the work I built. I stared at the screen until it blurred slightly, then cleared. Like my eyes were trying to reject what they were seeing. I messaged IT quietly and asked if there had been a change request. The same friendly coworker responded with a single sentence. "It went through last night." I didn't react outwardly. I didn't slam my laptop. I didn't storm into Grant's office. I opened my private timeline document and wrote, "Access removed. Ownership transferred. Date, _______. Then I called Priya. She said, "Okay." That was all. Just okay. Like we were finally at the part of the chess game where the board mattered. We drafted a letter. Not a dramatic lawsuit threat. A formal legal letter to HR and Grant and the company's counsel. It stated that I had documentation showing a planned separation based on fabricated culture fit concerns, that I had been directed to produce significant deliverables under false pretenses, and that the company had misrepresented my authorship and contributions. It requested an immediate pause on the launch until the matter was resolved, and it outlined severance terms and conditions for a mutually agreeable separation. And yes, it was timed. Priya asked me, "Do you want to send this now, or do you want to wait?" I looked at the launch countdown Slack message on my screen. I imagined Grant on stage, metaphorically, taking credit for my work while I sat at home unemployed, watching my templates become his legacy. I said, "We send it the day before launch." Priya didn't flinch. "Then we send it the day before launch." So I waited. And during that waiting, something interesting happened in my own head. At first, I wanted justice in a clean, cinematic way. I wanted someone to apologize. I wanted someone to say, "We were wrong." I wanted my name attached to the work. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized I didn't want their recognition. I wanted my future protected. I wanted them to stop treating people like disposable scaffolding. I thought about Jenna, who would inherit the mess. I thought about the team, who would be told to cheer while a colleague was quietly removed. I thought about how many times I'd heard family used as a leash. So when the day came, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The day before launch, at 9:03 a.m., Priya sent the letter. At 9:17 a.m., my phone started vibrating like it was possessed. Grant called. HR called. A director I barely spoke to called. Slack lit up with messages. "Hey, can you jump on a quick call? Urgent. Need to discuss." I didn't respond. Priya had instructed me not to engage directly. The letter was the communication. At 10:05 a.m., HR emailed me saying they were surprised and disappointed and wanted to resolve this internally. At 10:11 a.m., Grant emailed me directly, "Anastasia, I don't understand why you're doing this. We're family." I stared at that line for a long time. I read it slowly, like tasting something bitter. Then I forwarded it to Priya. By noon, the launch was postponed. Not officially announced as postponed. They used softer language. Delayed to ensure alignment. Pushed to accommodate stakeholder feedback. Rescheduled to optimize rollout. Corporate lies are always dressed in polite clothing. But internally, it collapsed. Meetings were canceled. The launch day agenda disappeared. Slack messages shifted from hype to confusion. People started whispering. The team asked Jenna what was happening, and she looked like she might faint. Grant tried to salvage it by claiming there was a legal review. He told people it was routine. He tried to make it sound like he was in control. But he wasn't. Because the thing about systems is that once you build them, you can also see where they break. And I knew exactly what they needed for launch. My work, my training, my coordination, my stakeholder trust. They had stolen the materials, yes, but they hadn't replaced the mind behind them. That afternoon, I got an email from the company's legal counsel asking to schedule a call. Priya joined the call with me. She spoke calmly. She cited the email chain. She cited the access removal. She cited the misrepresentation of my authorship. She explained the risk of proceeding with launch amid a dispute involving employee separation and manufactured performance concerns. The counsel's tone changed midway through the call. It shifted from "we deny wrongdoing" to "we want to resolve this." By the end of the day, the company offered a revised severance package. It included extended pay, benefits coverage, a neutral reference letter, and a non-disparagement clause that applied to both sides. It also included a written acknowledgement that I had led the creation and implementation of the onboarding process. Grant wasn't on that email. HR wrote it like it was their idea, like they were generously doing the right thing. I accepted. Not because it felt like victory. Because it was protection. Because it was the best possible outcome in a situation where trust was already dead. And then I logged off. The next week, I turned in my equipment. I returned my badge. I didn't attend a farewell call. I didn't write a goodbye message in Slack. I didn't offer closure to people who had watched me be erased. Jenna texted me privately after I left. She said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I hope you're okay." I told her, "You didn't do this. Take care of yourself." A month later, I heard through a former coworker that Grant had moved on to another opportunity, which is corporate for he was pushed out quietly before the story got louder. The launch eventually happened, but it was messy. They rolled it out in fragments. People complained. Clients noticed the inconsistency. The team struggled without the structure being actively maintained. And me? I found a new job. A better one. A company that didn't call itself a family. A leader who gave credit without being asked. A team that didn't treat documentation like a threat. But I still think about that email chain. Support the narrative. Culture fit. Minimize optics. It's wild how many people think work is just output. That you can extract it from someone and discard the person like packaging. So here's why I'm posting and why I'm genuinely asking. AITA for sending that legal letter the day before launch, knowing it would collapse the project? Because part of me wonders if I should have just taken the severance quietly, let them launch, and walked away. The team didn't deserve the chaos. Jenna didn't deserve the spotlight of a delayed launch. Some people on the team were excited and proud, and that moment was stolen from them too. But another part of me thinks, if someone plans to push you out while taking your work and calling you not a culture fit, the only language they understand is consequence. Update 1, because apparently my nervous system didn't get the memo that it was over. I didn't think there would be more to tell after I signed the revised severance and walked away. I thought the story ended with me handing over my badge, collecting my box of desk items, and driving home with that hollow feeling you get when you realize you gave a place your best energy and it still tried to eat you. But corporate stories don't end cleanly. They just change meeting titles. A week after I left, I woke up to 3 texts from 2 different former coworkers and 1 from a number I didn't have saved but recognized by area code. All of them variations of the same thing. Are you okay? Did you see Slack? Grant is saying stuff. My first instinct was to ignore it. That's what severance is supposed to buy you, distance. But then my friend Talia, she was in product ops, the kind of competent person leadership always claims to want and then quietly punishes for being competent, sent me a screenshot. It was a message from Grant in a big cross-functional channel I had been removed from. As we move forward, I want to acknowledge that the launch delay was due to an internal personnel issue. While unfortunate, it's a reminder that culture and trust are the foundation of our work. We're committed to protecting our IP and our people. Protecting our people. I read it 3 times. The 3rd time, I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was so brazen my brain couldn't process it any other way. Talia followed up with, "He's implying you tried to steal company work." My whole body went cold. This is where I need to clarify something. In the revised separation agreement, there was mutual non-disparagement and a neutral reference clause. Neutral reference is corporate shorthand for, we won't call you evil to future employers as long as you also don't call us evil on the internet. So, technically, Grant shouldn't have been saying anything about me. Not even vague personnel issue nonsense if it was pointed enough to taint my reputation. Also, and this matters, the written acknowledgement of my work was part of the deal. It wasn't about ego. It was about him never again being able to publicly imply the onboarding framework was his or that I was some rogue employee trying to claim what wasn't mine. And yet here he was, protecting our IP. It was like watching someone light a match in a room full of gas and then blame the air. I texted Priya. I didn't write a paragraph. I wrote 1 line. Grant is implying I tried to steal IP. Her reply came fast. Do not respond. Send me screenshots. All of them. So I asked Talia and the others for everything they had. Over the next hour, my phone turned into a slow drip of evidence. A screenshot from an internal Q&A doc for the delayed launch. Question: why did we postpone? A. Alignment. Legal review. Ensuring our internal standards and culture are upheld. Another message from Grant in a manager channel. Sometimes talent isn't enough if trust isn't there. And then the worst one. This came from a team member I barely knew, someone from sales enablement. She wrote me a private email with no subject line. It said, "Hi Anastasia. I don't know you well, but I'm reaching out because people are saying you threatened to sue unless you got credit. I'm sorry if that's true. I just thought you should know what's being said." I stared at that email until my eyes started to sting. Not because I was surprised. Because I was suddenly, acutely aware of what Grant was doing. He wasn't trying to protect the company. He was trying to protect the story. He wanted the family to see me as the villain so they wouldn't question why he needed me gone in the first place. He wanted the team to interpret the delay as a necessary cleansing, not a consequence of leadership misconduct. And most importantly, he wanted to poison the well in case I ever spoke up again. It was classic. If you can't erase someone's work, you erase their credibility. Priya called me that afternoon. Her voice was calm in the way you want your attorney's voice to be calm. She said, "He's testing whether you'll break the agreement by defending yourself." I swallowed. "So if I respond, I lose?" "If you respond publicly, yes. He wants you emotional. He wants you reactive. He wants you to look unstable." I was quiet for a moment, then said, "So what do we do?" Priya said, "We enforce." That word, enforce, was a relief. Like hearing someone call a thing by its real name. She sent a notice to HR and the company council the same day. Short, clean, surgical. It included screenshots, referenced the non-disparagement clause, and requested immediate corrective communication, as well as confirmation that Grant was instructed to stop discussing me. Within 2 hours, HR replied with the blandest email I have ever read in my life. "We take these concerns seriously and will address internally." I could practically hear Marlene's keyboard clacking with the force of a woman who had built her career on address internally. By the next morning, the "protecting our IP" message was gone from the channel. Deleted. Grant didn't apologize. Of course not. People like him don't apologize, they clarify. A new message appeared, posted by HR, not Grant. "We want to reiterate that we do not discuss personnel matters internally. The recent delay was due to scheduling and stakeholder alignment. Thank you for keeping communications respectful." Scheduling and stakeholder alignment. So now we were lying in the opposite direction. Great. But the important part was, he'd been muzzled. For about a week, things went quiet. I tried to settle into my new routine. Interviews, coffee that didn't taste like panic, long walks where I could breathe without thinking of Slack notifications. Then I got an email from Jenna. Subject line, "I'm sorry to bother you." The body was just 3 sentences. I didn't know what was happening before. "I'm seeing more now. Can we talk?" Off the record. My first instinct was to protect myself. I had an agreement. I had boundaries. I had just escaped. But Jenna sounded scared. So I agreed to a short call. When she answered, she didn't do small talk. She sounded tired in a way that made my chest tighten. She said, "I think he's going to do to me what he did to you." That made me go still. She explained that after I left, Grant had pulled her into daily alignment meetings. The onboarding initiative was now hers, but she didn't have real control. Grant wanted her to present it while he sat in the background, correcting her live. He would praise her in front of others, then tear her down in private. He also started using my name as a warning. Jenna said, "He keeps saying, we can't have another Anastasia situation. Like I'm supposed to learn from it. Like you were, a cautionary tale." I could feel my jaw clench. She continued, "And now he's saying the launch didn't land because the process wasn't adopted correctly, and he's asking for a post-mortem, and he wants me to lead it." I knew exactly what that meant. Post-mortem, in a place like that, wasn't about learning. It was about finding a scapegoat in a suit. Jenna said, "He's asking for documentation of where execution failed. He wants me to list gaps. And he keeps saying I need to be honest even if it makes people uncomfortable." A slow heat spread through me. Not anger at Jenna, anger at the predictability of it. He was trying to rewrite the story again. First, the hero. Then the victim. Then the righteous judge. I asked Jenna carefully, "Have you put anything in writing?" She hesitated. "Some." "What kind of some?" "Like, notes in shared docs. Comments. Feedback summaries." "Okay," I said. "Don't add anything else without saving your own copy." There was a pause, and then she said quietly, "I feel insane. Like I'm always one sentence away from getting in trouble." I recognized that feeling so intensely it almost made me nauseous. I said, "You're not insane. That's a tactic. Keep your receipts." I didn't tell her to revolt. I didn't tell her to confront him. I didn't tell her to do anything dramatic. I told her how to survive. Document facts. Save versions. Confirm assignments by email. BCC personal if needed, within policy and legal boundaries. Keep communications neutral. Use per our discussion like armor. Because the most dangerous place to be in corporate politics is alone with your memories. They will try to convince you your experience wasn't real. Before we hung up, Jenna said, "Did you plan a letter to collapse everything?" I was honest. I planned it to protect myself. The collapse was a consequence of their choices. She whispered, "I wish I'd done that sooner in my career." When we ended the call, I sat there staring at the wall. I felt something I didn't expect, grief. Not for the job. For the version of myself that believed competence would be enough. Update 2, the part where it stops being just work. About 10 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the company's in-house counsel. I almost didn't answer. But I did, because curiosity is one of my worst traits. He said, "Anastasia, I'm calling to clarify a few details related to your separation agreement." I said, "Okay." His tone was overly polite. Like someone talking to a dog they're not sure will bite. He said, "We're conducting an internal review of communications surrounding the onboarding project." Internal review. I said, "Is this about Grant's messages?" There was a pause. Partially. He continued, "We'd like to confirm you have not retained or distributed company materials beyond what is permitted." I understood immediately. They were still trying to build a story. Even after the agreement. Even after the muzzle. They wanted to make sure they could accuse me of something if they needed a distraction. I said, evenly, I complied with my agreement. My attorney can respond in writing if you have specific questions. He quickly said, "Of course. Of course. We'll follow up through counsel." And then he said something that surprised me. "Off the record, it might be best if you don't engage with current employees." I almost laughed. "I'm not." He cleared his throat. "We've had reports." Reports. Translation. Grant is still trying to create ripples. After that call, I forwarded everything to Priya. Her response was simple. They're scared. And she was right. Because here's what I learned after all of this. Companies don't fear fairness. They fear patterns. If one person quietly enforces boundaries and wins even a small concession, it threatens the unspoken rule that employees are supposed to absorb damage politely. And the weirdest part? A few days later, I got a LinkedIn message from someone at the company, someone in HR, not Marlene, a junior person I'd barely interacted with. She wrote, "I saw what happened with the launch, and I just want to say, I'm sorry. I know you can't talk about it. But thank you for standing up." I stared at that message for a long time. Because that's the thing no one tells you when you do the calm, methodical move. You don't just shake the person who tried to erase you. You remind everyone watching that they're allowed to say no. So, AITA? I still don't know how to answer in a clean way. Did the team suffer? Yes. Did Jenna have a miserable month? Yes. Did the launch get delayed and did people scramble? Yes. But was the alternative letting Grant steal the work, erase my name, paint me as unstable, and push me out quietly so the family could keep pretending everything was fine? Also yes. And I'm done being the person who absorbs harm so everyone else can keep their illusions. Not really, I cut it off too abruptly. Here's the actual final update plus ending, written like a real AITA wrap-up. Final update, and yes, this is the end. After the in-house counsel call and Priya's "they're scared" text, I decided I was done living in the fog of their story. I wanted a clean ending that didn't require me to violate my agreement, but also didn't leave my reputation dangling like a rumor. So I did 3 things. 1, I locked down my future. I had 2 late-stage interviews going, and I stopped dancing around why I left my last role. I didn't trash anyone. I didn't use names. I didn't even say toxic. I said, the role changed after I delivered a major process overhaul. I negotiated a mutual separation, and I'm looking for a place that values clear ownership, documentation, and sustainable operations. That was it. Calm. Adult. No blood on the carpet. And it worked. A week later, I got an offer from a company that asked the kind of questions I hadn't heard in forever. What do you need to succeed? How do you prefer to communicate? Who should get credit for what? I almost cried in the Zoom call. 2. Priya forced the company to correct the narrative. Priya sent one more letter. Not dramatic, not threatening. Just firm. It said, essentially, you will stop referencing Anastasia in any internal training, cautionary examples, or lessons learned. You will circulate a brief correction to the leadership group stating that the onboarding assets were created under her leadership and that no IP wrongdoing occurred. You will confirm, in writing, that her departure is to be treated as a mutual separation with neutral reference only. This time, the reply came from the company's outside counsel. The tone was different, brisk, respectful, and, honestly, scared. They agreed. 2 days later, Talia texted me a screenshot from a small manager-only channel. Reminder, please refrain from commentary on former employees. Anastasia's separation was mutual and handled appropriately. The onboarding initiative reflects cross-functional effort led by Ops Enablement. That last part? Led by Ops Enablement. That was code for me without naming me, but it was enough. It shut down the Whisper campaign because it removed the only oxygen it had. 3. The part that made everything snap into focus. Jenna called me again. This time she sounded steady, not cheerful. Just steady, like someone who'd finally accepted that the building was on fire and stopped blaming herself for the smoke. She told me the post-mortem Grant wanted became a weapon against him. Because Grant had forced everyone to document where execution failed and people did. They documented everything. They documented. That training was cut short because Grant insisted on simplifying. That stakeholders were confused because he changed messaging last minute. That access was restricted and people couldn't update templates. That decisions were made without the people doing the work in the room. And the funniest part? Grant's own need for control created the paper trail that made him look incompetent. According to Jenna, the directors started asking questions like, why did you remove the original owner from the folder? Why did you present materials you didn't build? Why was there a culture fit separation right before launch? Jenna didn't say they fired him because companies rarely say that. She said, he's transitioning out. Quietly. They're calling it a strategic move. And then she said something that made my throat tight. I'm sorry I benefited from what you built. I didn't realize I was standing on someone else's floorboards. I told her the truth. I built it so the team wouldn't drown. You weren't the thief. He was. There was a pause, and she exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for months. Then she told me she'd accepted a role in another department. Away from Grant. Away from the launch circus. She said, I learned something from you. You didn't scream. You didn't explode. You just moved the chess piece. I hung up and stared at my ceiling for a long time. Because that was the moment I realized the real ending wasn't the letter. The real ending was me not becoming who they wanted me to become. They wanted me frantic, bitter, loud, easy to dismiss. They wanted the story, difficult employee, not a culture fit, had to go. Instead, I stayed calm, documented everything, and made the consequences land where they belonged. So, AITA? If this were Reddit, I already know what the top comment would be. And TA. Because here's the blunt truth. If a company plans your exit while using your work and rewriting reality, the team isn't being protected by your silence. They're being trained to accept the same treatment next. Did it disrupt people? Yes. Did it force an ugly pause? Yes. But the launch didn't collapse because of my letter. It collapsed because it was built on theft and ego and a boss who thought family meant you owe me your spine. And now I'm somewhere else, someplace that doesn't call itself a family. Just a workplace. And honestly, that's the healthiest ending I could have written. If you made it this far, I need your take, ATA or NTA. Drop your verdict in the comments, tell me what you would have done, and if you've ever dealt with a we're family workplace. I know you've got a story. And if you want more calm revenge workplace disasters like this, hit like, subscribe, and check the playlist for the next update, because the family always has one more secret.